The moment my life started to fall apart didn't look dramatic at all. There was no shouting, no breaking glass, no obvious betrayal. It happened on an ordinary weekday morning, while my daughter was tying her shoes near the front door, and I was rushing to grab my keys like I always did. Without looking up, she said in a quiet, almost casual voice, "Mom, are you going to tell him or should I?" At first, I didn't even understand what she meant. I remember letting out a small laugh, assuming she was talking about something harmless, maybe something she had done and didn't want to confess to her father. I asked her what she meant, but when she finally looked up at me, there was something in her eyes that made my chest tighten. It wasn't fear and it wasn't guilt. It was something much heavier, something I wasn't used to seeing in an 11-year-old child. It was certainty. I brushed it off in that moment because I had no other choice. Mark was in the hallway, adjusting his tie, already half late for work, and the morning routine didn't leave space for confusion or emotional conversations. Life had to keep moving. That's what I told myself anyway. But as I drove Lily to school, her words kept echoing in my mind in a way I couldn't shake. There was something wrong, not just with what she said, but with how she said it, like she wasn't asking a question but reminding me of something I was supposed to already know. Up until that morning, I would have described my life as stable. Not perfect, but predictable in a comforting way. I was 38, working part-time at a dental office, juggling schedules, groceries, laundry, and all the invisible responsibilities that come with being a mother. My husband Mark had a steady job, and although things between us had grown quieter over the years, I believed that was normal. People settle, the excitement fades, routines take over, and you learn to find comfort in that rhythm. At least that's what I had always believed. Lily had changed recently, though. I couldn't pinpoint exactly when it started, but over the past few months, she had become more reserved, more watchful. She wasn't acting out or getting into trouble. If anything, she had become easier to manage. But there was a difference between a calm child and a distant one, and I was starting to feel that distance without fully understanding it. Sometimes I would catch her looking at me in a strange way, as if she was trying to figure something out, or maybe deciding whether to say something and then choosing not to. Every time I asked if she was okay, she would nod and say yes, but her answers felt automatic, like she was giving me the version of the truth I expected to hear. Mark had been different too, although I didn't allow myself to think too deeply about it at first. After 13 years of marriage, you notice even the smallest shifts in a person's behavior. He started coming home later than usual, not dramatically late, but just enough to disrupt the rhythm we had built over the years. He would say work had been busy, that things were complicated at the office, and it all sounded reasonable. There were layoffs happening, restructuring, pressure from management. It made sense for him to stay longer. I told myself that questioning him would only create unnecessary tension, and I didn't want to become that kind of wife, the suspicious one, the one who reads into everything. At the same time, something else was happening, something I found harder to explain. I began to forget things. At first, it was small, almost laughable moments like misplacing my keys or walking into a room and forgetting why I had gone there. I blamed stress, lack of sleep, the usual things people blame when life feels slightly off balance. But then there were moments that didn't feel normal at all. One afternoon, I found a receipt in my coat pocket from a cafe across town, a place I didn't remember visiting. I stood there in the kitchen holding that piece of paper, trying to force the memory to come back. But there was nothing. No image, no feeling, no trace of recognition. When I asked Mark about it later, he barely reacted. He suggested I might have gone there with a friend, and for a moment I almost accepted that explanation. But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. I didn't have any friends who lived near that area, and I couldn't remember making any plans that would take me there. Still, I let it go because the alternative was too unsettling to consider. After what Lily said that morning, though, everything I had ignored started to feel connected. Her words weren't random anymore. They felt like a missing piece of something much larger, something I was only beginning to see. I spent the entire day at work distracted, replaying her voice in my head, analyzing every detail of the past few months, trying to find a logical explanation that would make all of this less frightening. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became that I wasn't just dealing with one problem. There was a pattern, and I had somehow missed it completely. That evening, I tried to bring it up with Mark, but I couldn't bring myself to say everything I was thinking. I asked him if he had noticed anything different about Lily, if she had said anything unusual to him. He brushed it off in the same way I had tried to earlier, saying she was just going through a phase. When I mentioned that she had accused me of lying, even in a light, almost joking tone, I saw something change in his expression. It was subtle, just a slight pause before he responded, but it was enough to make my stomach tighten. He asked what exactly she had said, and for a brief moment I felt like I was the one being questioned. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling like there was something just out of reach in my mind, something I should have remembered but couldn't. At some point, I drifted into a restless half-sleep, and that's when the image came to me. I was sitting in a car that wasn't mine, listening to a man's voice. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I remember the feeling, a sense of familiarity, of comfort, like I had known him for a long time. When I woke up, my heart was racing, and I couldn't tell if what I had experienced was a dream or a memory. The next morning, driven by a mix of fear and desperation, I did something I never thought I would do. I went through Mark's phone. I waited until he left for work, then picked it up from the kitchen counter, telling myself I just needed answers. At first, everything looked normal. Messages, emails, photos that matched the life I thought we had. But then I found a hidden folder, something I had never seen before. When I opened it, I felt like the ground disappeared beneath me. Inside were photos of me, but not the kind I recognized. They weren't family pictures or casual snapshots. These were moments I had no memory of. In the photos, I was sitting in that same cafe from the receipt, talking to a man I didn't recognize, smiling in a way that felt unfamiliar even to me. There were multiple pictures taken on different days in different clothes, but always with the same person. In one of them, I was holding his hand. I stared at those images for a long time, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but nothing about it felt real. It wasn't just that I didn't remember those moments. It was the expression on my own face that unsettled me the most. I looked genuinely happy, relaxed in a way I hadn't felt in years, and that realization scared me more than anything else. By the time I put the phone down, my hands were shaking. There were only two possible explanations, and both of them were terrifying. Either something was seriously wrong with my memory, or I had been living a part of my life without even realizing it. That afternoon, I picked Lily up from school earlier than usual. When she got into the car, she looked at me carefully, like she already knew something had changed. This time, I didn't try to pretend everything was fine. I told her I had seen something, and that I needed her to tell me the truth, no matter how difficult it was. She didn't argue or hesitate. She just nodded, as if she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The silence felt heavier than any argument could have been. Then I finally asked the question that had been building inside me all day, the one I was almost afraid to hear the answer to. Lily, who is that man I've been meeting? She looked straight at me, her expression steady, and said something that made my entire body go cold. He's not the one you should be asking about. And in that moment, I realized that whatever secret my daughter had been holding, it was much bigger than I was ready for. For a moment, I couldn't even process what Lily had just said. Her words didn't fit into any version of reality I was trying to hold on to, and yet the calm certainty in her voice made it impossible to dismiss them. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, feeling a strange mix of fear and urgency building inside me, as if I was standing at the edge of something irreversible. I asked her what she meant, trying to keep my voice steady, but she didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked out the window, watching the passing houses as if she was deciding how much of the truth I was ready to hear. After a few seconds that felt much longer, she finally spoke, and what she said didn't come out like a dramatic confession, but more like something she had rehearsed quietly in her head many times before. She told me that the man in the photos wasn't the biggest secret I had been hiding, and that, in fact, I had been acting like a completely different person for months. She said there were days when I would leave the house after dropping her off at school, and when I came back, something about me felt off. Not in a way that was obvious enough for anyone else to notice immediately, but enough for her because she knew me better than anyone else. She described it as if I was there but not really there, like I was playing a role instead of being myself. At first, I wanted to interrupt her, to tell her that she was imagining things, that kids sometimes create stories when they don't understand what's happening around them. But I couldn't because deep down, I already knew that something she was saying matched the feeling I had been trying to ignore. That sense of missing time, of gaps in my memory that I couldn't explain, suddenly felt less like stress and more like something much more serious. When I asked her why she hadn't told me earlier, she gave me an answer that hit harder than anything else. She said she had tried more than once, but every time she brought it up, I would either laugh it off or change the subject like I didn't want to hear it. And eventually she stopped trying because it felt like I wasn't really listening anymore. Hearing that from my own child forced me to confront something I hadn't been ready to admit. I hadn't just been missing parts of my life, I had been emotionally absent even when I was physically present. I pulled the car over because I realized I couldn't keep driving. My hands were trembling, and my thoughts were spinning too fast to focus on anything else. I turned to face her fully and asked the question that scared me the most, the one I had been avoiding even in my own mind. I asked her if she knew who the man in the photos was, and this time she didn't hesitate. She said his name was Daniel, and that she had seen me with him more than once. Not up close, not in a way that would have made it obvious to anyone else, but enough to know that whatever was happening between us wasn't accidental. Hearing his name made everything feel suddenly more real, more concrete. This wasn't just a vague fear or a misunderstanding. This was a person, someone who existed, someone who had been part of my life in a way I couldn't remember. I asked her how long this had been going on, and she told me it had been at least 4 months. 4 months of my life, partially erased, partially hidden, existing somewhere just out of reach of my own awareness. The next thing she said was the first real shock I wasn't prepared for. She told me that one day she had followed me. She knew it was wrong, and she said it quietly, almost apologetically, but she needed to understand what was happening. She had asked a friend's mom to drop her off early, and instead of going into school, she waited until I left and then kept her distance while I drove. She watched me park near that cafe, the same one from the receipt, and then she saw me meet him. She said I looked different when I was with him, lighter, like a version of myself she hadn't seen in a long time. That detail stayed with me, not because it explained anything, but because it made everything more complicated. If I had been unhappy, truly unhappy, I would have expected myself to feel lost or distant. But the idea that there was a version of me out there who was genuinely happy, even if it was hidden from my own memory, created a kind of emotional conflict I didn't know how to process. It made me question not just what had happened, but why it had happened. When we got home, the atmosphere in the house felt completely different, even though nothing had physically changed. Every familiar object suddenly felt like it belonged to a version of my life that I didn't fully recognize anymore. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I had to confront Mark, not just about the photos, but about everything. The late nights, the strange reactions, the feeling that he knew more than he was saying. When he walked through the door that evening, I didn't give myself time to hesitate. I told him we needed to talk, and something in my tone must have made it clear that this wasn't a casual conversation. Lily went upstairs without being asked, as if she understood that what was about to happen was something she shouldn't be in the middle of, even though she already knew more than either of us wanted to admit. I showed him the photos first. I watched his face carefully as he looked at them, waiting for some sign of surprise, confusion, anything that would tell me he was seeing them for the first time. But that reaction never came. Instead, his shoulders dropped slightly, and he closed his eyes for a brief moment, like someone who had been expecting this moment for a long time. That was the second real shock. He already knew. When I asked him how long he had known, he didn't try to deny it. He told me he had found out about 2 months ago, completely by accident. He had seen a message on my phone, something he hadn't meant to look at, but once he saw it, he couldn't ignore it. He confronted me about it, and according to him, I admitted everything. Not just that I had been seeing someone else, but that I felt different when I was with him, more like myself. I stared at him, trying to understand how that conversation could have happened without leaving any trace in my memory. It felt impossible, like he was describing someone else's life, not mine. I told him I didn't remember any of it, and for a moment, he looked at me with something that wasn't anger but exhaustion. He said that at first he thought I was pretending, trying to avoid responsibility, but over time he started to notice the same things Lily had described. The gaps, the inconsistencies, the way I would sometimes seem unaware of things I had said or done just days before. That's when the third and most devastating revelation came. He told me that the reason he had been coming home late wasn't just work. He had been meeting with a doctor, a specialist. He had already started the process of trying to understand what was happening to me. but he didn't know how to tell me without making everything worse. I felt a wave of emotions crash over me all at once: anger, confusion, betrayal, but also something else that I hadn't expected: relief. Because for the first time since all of this started, there was a possibility that I wasn't just losing control of my life without explanation. There was a reason, even if I didn't fully understand it yet. Over the next few days, everything moved quickly. Appointments were scheduled, tests were done, and slowly, pieces of the puzzle started to come together. The final answer wasn't simple, and it wasn't something I could easily accept, but it explained more than I was ready to hear. The doctor told me that what I had been experiencing wasn't just stress or forgetfulness. It was a form of dissociation, triggered by long-term emotional suppression and unresolved internal conflict. In simpler terms, part of me had been trying to escape a life that no longer felt like mine, and instead of confronting that feeling directly, my mind had created a way to separate it. The version of me that met Daniel wasn't a completely different person, but it was a part of me that I had pushed down for so long that it had started to exist independently, outside of my awareness. The fourth shock wasn't the diagnosis itself, but what came after. When I finally agreed to meet Daniel in a controlled setting, with full awareness and support, I expected to feel confusion or fear, but instead I felt recognition. Not of him as a stranger, but of myself in those moments I couldn't remember. He didn't represent a mistake or a betrayal in the way I had initially thought. He represented something I had been missing for years, something I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge. That realization didn't fix anything overnight. If anything, it made things more complicated. Mark and I had to confront the reality of our relationship, not just what had happened, but what had led to it. There were long conversations, uncomfortable silences, and moments where it felt like everything we had built together was on the verge of falling apart. But for the first time in a long time, those conversations were honest. There was no pretending, no ignoring the parts of ourselves we didn't want to face. Lily, in her own quiet way, became the bridge between us. Not by fixing anything, but by refusing to let us avoid the truth. She had seen what was happening before anyone else, and even though it wasn't her responsibility, she had carried that knowledge until we were ready to face it. In the end, the biggest secret my child revealed wasn't about another person. It was about me, about the parts of myself I had hidden so deeply that even I couldn't see them anymore. And as painful as it was to confront that truth, it forced me to finally ask the question I had been avoiding for years. Not just who I had been pretending to be, but who I actually wanted to become. Because sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't discovering that someone else has been lying to you. It's realizing that you've been lying to yourself all along.